Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Rolo Tomassi called Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It. So this one's been taking its sweet time rising up my schedule, and one that I've been rather perplexed about covering, not just because of the critical acclaim, but also because it's received some popular backlash for possibly simplifying and streamlining their sound, which might have been that step needed to win over more contemporary critics, but definitely would have alienated the diehard fans. And speaking as somebody who is definitely not one of those diehard fans, some of that might have been helpful for me, because Rolo Tomassi are not exactly close to an accessible act. Screamo vocals balanced in with female clean singing, wild shifts in time signatures and structures that recall something closer to jazz fusion than prog rock or even mathcore, and let's not forget the synth tones that somehow picked a mutation of chiptune that gave me a splitting headache every time I listened to them. Yeah, let's not beat around the bush here. Having listened to all of Rolo Tomassi's records, I did my homework. I had a really hard time getting into them. I'm sorry. Sure, I can respect the sheer talent behind the band, and there were some of the more restrained, atmospheric moments that I liked, but I also get the impression that said moments were not the ones that were winning over the most acclaim from the diehard fans. But hey, Estrella was heading in a slightly more refined direction, as was Grievances in its own twisted, much darker way, and if Rolo Tomassi were looking to double down on some of those tones for future releases, or even just accessibility a decade into their careers if they wanted to break popularity, well, again, it's a bit of a balancing act, but I can see how it would alienate some people. So alright, how is Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It? Well, here's the thing. Having gone through this album multiple times, I completely see why some of the diehard fans might have turned on this record, because it is more straightforward and direct. Many of the mathcore elements have been outright removed in favor of more clean singing and relatively conventional song structures and even some elements of post-rock. It is by far their most accessible release to date, and I can even see why some might brand it a sellout. And thus it gets kind of awkward when I'm stuck saying that I might be liking this project more than any of their others. Hey, I said right from the start that the wilder mathcore material and incredibly grating synth tones were what alienated me from the band in the first place, and steps towards this brand of refinement would probably be something I would like, but probably would not be the best sell to the larger fan base. I know I'm not really going to make any friends with this among that group, especially as I'm still not quite as over the moon as some critics are on the album as a whole. I mean, I think it's great, but not quite album of the year material. But you know what? If this is the album that really breaks Rolo Tomassi, yeah, I would not be surprised, because it is a damn great record, and I definitely want you all to check it out. I'm late to the punch here. Now, some of you might be thinking that I'm taking some of these opinions because I'm less of a fan of subgenres like jazz fusion and mathcore and certain contemporary classical music as a whole. And while some of that is absolutely true, I'll admit it, it's important to articulate why that is, because I can still appreciate dramatic clash and music that takes weird shifts in time signature, tempo, and structure. Hell, I've cited my appreciation for acts like Anna Meredith and Cynic in the past, and I just reviewed Between the Buried and Me. Now, for me, a huge part of appreciating these unique subgenres does come down to appreciation of the technical spectacle of it all, but if I'm looking for stuff that connects more emotionally and deeply for me, I'm listening for melodic patterns and climax points, elements within what might just seem to many listeners as chaos or just noise, but reflect some actual craftsmanship within the melodies. And while a lot of great improvisational musicians in jazz, they can deliver it, there is a distinctive subset of jazz fusion and mathcore acts that embrace the obscene complexity more for its own sake, and almost seem to relish disrupting even the audience that gets this kind of music. And sure, there's an audience that are looking for that vibe too, but if you're looking to drive active disengagement with your larger audience, who even has a grasp on how to listen to this more complex music, not challenge their perception, actively drive them away, I'm not going to get all that engaged. I'm not going to find it all that compelling. And then of course you get the subset where the technical wankery comes at the expense of structure altogether, but a trained ear can typically pick some of these out, and I have never slotted Rolo Tomassi in that category anyway, even at their least listenable. So when I say that I can get into Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It, some some of this does come in those patterns being more readily apparent, complex but stable within the mix, and not picking synthesizer tones that give me a splitting migraine. Yeah, I'm gonna cite this as a net positive right out of the gate here, because while the synthesizers are there and they can be a tad blaring on songs like Balancing the Dark for my personal taste, they better complement the insane chugging riffs thanks to a little bit more sticky body and texture in the low end. Or on songs like A Flood of Light, they're used in conjunction with the rougher riffs to accent one of the best climax points on the entire album. It is amazing, probably my favorite song here. But beyond all that, Rolo Tomassi have said that they consciously integrated more pop-leaning elements like the pianos and Eva Spence's clean singing into this album in terms of the cleaner melodies to match against James Spence's more guttural screams, the pummeling guitar work, the seething, often off-kilter bass lines, and the damn near blast beat drumming. And yes, it might not be as consistently brutal as Grievances was, or as actively chaotic as some of their earlier records could appear, but I won't dismiss that there is a certain level of complexity to this as well, in making those brighter, shining pop tones feel cohesive against the darkness or have any sort of proper mix balance does require some degree of complexity there. I will call that out. Hell, even though this album's DNA is closer to more post-hardcore and mathcore, without borderline heavy and thrash some of these songs like Alma Mater can get, I'm almost reminded of the balancing act that so much atmospheric black metal or post-metal tries to attain, especially with a mix that's trying to sound so huge and sweeping, and while occasionally relying a shade bit too much on reverb-soaked guitars and pianos, still often has the real crunch and texture in order to balance it out. The explosive climax midway through Contretemps is damn near a perfect example of sticking that landing, another real big album highlight. Now that's not saying this record doesn't take its time actually getting there. Towards Dawn is a fluttery, atmospheric instrumental that opens up the album, maybe not the best of choices, and despite a more defined groove and a heavier hook, Aftermath still doesn't bring in the dirty vocals. In fact, it almost drowns out some of the cleaner vocals in one of the few mixing slip-ups on the album. But I'm still not sure how you could not be unsatisfied with the insane drum work and the jagged riffs complementing some of the piano lines on Rituals, or the transitions spiking off the cloud of cymbals and seething grooves on the Hollow Hour, or how the shredding on Alma Mater is damn near a thrash speeds and in that level of complexity, but can still shift gears wildly into a similar smoky jazz fusion vibe as Balancing the Dark does both in the intro and outro. Not the first time this record reminded me of Cynic, and in a really good way. And on the flip side, I'm not sure how you couldn't appreciate the beauty of the post-rock vibes of Risen or Contretemps, or how well the clean singing pays off on the outro of Flood of Light and really works for me. Hell, I think the only song that doesn't really click is Whispers Among Us. That's more because the riffs are a little bit less complex. They've still got that heaviness, but it fades into a meandering gray zone that the album has never really wanted to embrace. And that's something else very relevant to point out here. The juxtaposition between the howling darkness and the purifying blast of clear light, it isn't just an instrumental motif or a quirk of the production, it's damn near at the core of the themes of the album. Now this takes to a lot of the lyrics, and it's important to highlight how I really like the choice of language that Rolo Tomassi delivers on this album. It's intimate, it's approachable in its word choice, but it's aiming for the sort of arch abstraction that fits songs that are going to go so big and feel so heavy and massive. And yet, even though that style of writing can lead to a lack of nuance in certain metal genres, there's a surprising amount going on within these lyrics surrounding a hard confrontations with the endings of life and love, at some points almost seeming like a war with the very concept of time itself. In a strange way, and bear with me on this, is going to be out there, it almost seems a little bit reminiscent of Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens thematically, with songs like Aftermath speaking to an intellectual maturity about dealing with loss and death fairly quickly, only for the emotional undercurrent to shatter it in slow motion. Because sure, in your mind you can rationalize what that ending is gonna be and how you're not gonna be fighting against time itself because you can't, but love and emotionality does not operate on that rational continuum, and numb reality is blown apart pretty quickly on this record, especially as clinging on to memories that might provide some sort of deeper clarity, they are hollow anchors that keep the human emotional consciousness from really confronting the possibility of an end to its existence, especially with time's passage only ever bringing it closer. You can't exactly stop it. It's one reason why the pure rage of Alma Mater has so much righteous power in the desperate dichotomy between the heartfelt gratitude in having love and the terror of knowing that you could lose it so quickly. And what I really like is the implication on songs like A Flood of Light and Contretemps that said love it's never going to be perfect. Never quite that eternal ideal. There's going to be hard edges and imperfections, and that banishing everything that's not that ideal, it can leave you just as a husk yearning for what is actually real, an organic transcendence that doesn't need to feel overpowering to still take your breath away. Mirrored beautifully in the music with Risen showing just enough edge beneath the post-rock swell to show a balance not diminished by the contrast, but only enhanced by the synthesis. It's a beautiful closer. I really do love that song. So yeah, I know. I get how for hardcore fans this record might not be what you're looking for coming from Rolo Tomassi. In terms of in-your-face mathcore heaviness and complexity, this album is doing something very different, but with a different sort of complexity. And even then I would argue it sticks the landing in that lane amazingly well. More than capable of attracting a wider audience with thematic depth and richness enhanced by the sort of dramatic contrast and swell that I typically only go to and find in atmospheric black metal, and sometimes not even there done well enough, because I'd put this above the most recent Death Heaven album. So yeah, for me, light 8 out of 10, absolutely a recommendation. Yes, I know, I'm months later to the party on this one, and really this is not a band I would have otherwise checked out beyond this. And yes, you can call me a pleb for not really getting on board before now, but for me, it's better late than never, especially as this band only seems to be moving in this direction with a ton of potential. In other words, time's not quite dead for Rolo Tomassi, and you're gonna want to get on board before it is. So yeah, check this out, kicks ass. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I gotta be honest, I was not expecting to like this album nearly as much as I did. So yeah, I definitely want to support this. I know I'm late to the punch, but if you want to buy the record, links down there below. And I got the poll up there, and I'm hoping what you guys think about this. I know it's getting a lot of critical acclaim. I know this album's getting some backlash, but really, as somebody who's not hugely into post-hardcore or screamo or some of those elements, I just appreciate the metal side and the post-rock side. But yeah, if you are into more of those lanes, I can see you really getting on board with this. You're going to definitely want to check this out. It's pretty kick-ass. But yeah, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process so I can cover records like this months earlier, I want you guys to take a look at my Patreon linked over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details about the schedule, you can check my Instagram, link down there below. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.